Hello. In the third theme, we move from the classical economics to more modern 20th century economics. And that's the first step I introduced to the so-called specific factors model. So recall from the previous lesson that there were three basic reasons why the real international economy is not so specialized as the theory of comparative advantage would suggest. And I mentioned that when we introduce more than one factor of production, then the tendency towards specialization tends to reduce. So in this lesson, then we go to do exactly that. So let's now consider also the capital input, and I will indicate the capital stock by letter K, as usual in economics. And let's assume that the capital stock is fixed in the short run, like we usually do. So in this figure taken from the Krugman et al. Textbook that indicates the production function, and in this case we have example for production function for clothes. And recall that earlier in this David Ricardo's examples and further examples based on the theory of comparative advantage, we always assumed that labor productivity or the labor requirement for producing clothes or food or whatever commodities, that was always constant. So every worker has certain productivity, and that doesn't change. But now when we introduce the capital input and we assume that the capital is fixed, so suppose that you can think about a factory that has a certain kind of machines that need to be operated by workers. So initially, when you increase the or start from 0 workers and introduce the first worker and second worker, then of course they need to operate this machinery, and there's plenty of machines available. But when the capital stock is fixed and we introduce more and more workers, then of course initially the workers can specialize in operating certain machines, and this can improve their efficiency. But when we keep increasing more and more workers, then these additional workers then eventually have to take more like assisting roles and less important tasks in the production. So as a result, then the labor has this kind of diminishing returns, as indicated by this figure over here. So notice that the marginal product of labor in this example then decrease as we increase the labor input, and this is justified by the fact that the capital stock is fixed. So for the new workers there is not so much capital available, or this fixed capital needs to be divided by a larger number of workers when the labor input increases. And this is why then we think that this marginal product of labor tends to decrease as we increase this labor input while the capital input is fixed. So this is the typical kind of shape of the production function, not just for clothes but for any goods in particular. So what does this kind of curvature then imply for the production possibility set when we consider this kind of trade models? So here is a little bit complicated looking figure, but I will slowly walk you through this figure. So remember we had this kind of production function, concave production function with a given amount of capital. So we have this similar kind of production functions on the top left and bottom right quadrants of this figure, which are indicated with this gray background color. So here we have this production function of clothes on the bottom right corner of this figure. So notice that here the origin is over here. So this is like a little bit rotated figure. So labor is here increasing, and when we go downwards, and output is now on the right axis. So this is exactly the same kind of concave production function as in the previous slide for the cloth. Okay, so this is the same concave curve. We have just rotated it rotated to the right. So now in this example, we have also another good, like in this David Ricardo's examples. So we have here food and clothes. So cloth is here on the bottom part, and top part we have production function of food. So now this is like a mirror image of the previous production function. So we have labor input increasing to the left and output of food increasing to the right. Sorry, to the top direction. So it is a mirror image of this previous concave production function. Okay, so we increase the labor in food production, then we have this kind of diminishing returns, decreasing marginal product. So we have two production processes: production of food on the top left, and production of clothes on the bottom right quadrant of this figure. So then, how do we allocate labor between these two production processes? So then let's consider the bottom left corner of this figure. So this is described as economy's allocation of labor. So suppose that the economy has some total workforce, and then we can allocate the workers to either production of food or production of clothes. So this could be allocation can occur through the labor markets, or if it is some kind of so we could also think of some kind of centrally planned economy where some planner is allocating the workers. In whatever way we allocate then here is the total labor force is indicated by capital L, and then the more we allocate workers to the food production, less there will be available for the clothes production. So here is three different allocations numbered by 1, 2, and 3. So in the allocation number 1, then we assign more workers to food and less to the clothes, and then we can also then transfer it to this top right quadrant of the figure, which is mainly the main point of this figure, and this is then the production possibility frontier of the economy, indicated by the blue color. So depending on how we allocate the resources and what kind of curvature we have for the production functions, then the production possibility frontier of the economy becomes this kind of blue-colored curve, and which is curved away from the origin, like in this figure. So remember, in this earlier examples of David Ricardo, we had this kind of straight lines. Production possibility frontier was straight line because the labor productivity was constant for every worker. Now, when we introduce this capital input and we have this kind of diminishing returns for labor, so these production functions became concave curves, like on this gray areas. So now we can see when we plug in these different allocations of workforce. So if you have allocation number 1, then that leads to 1 prime in this production possibility frontier. Then if you have this allocation number 2, that leads to allocation 2 prime on the production possibility frontier. And similarly, if you have an allocation 3, where we put more workers to clothes production, less workers to food production, then we get this 3 prime. So notice that this curvature of this production possibility frontier comes from this concave production functions in food production and clothes production, and this concavity stems from the fact that we have a fixed amount of capital. So this is the idea, the basic idea why we talk about specific factors of production, that this capital is fixed. And also notice that the idea is that when capital is fixed, we cannot, for example, then transfer the capital from food production to clothes production or vice versa. So there is specific capital for food production, for example, agricultural equipment, and there is specific capital inputs in the clothes production. And those are not substitutable. Okay. So this kind of specific factors, in this case capital, which gives the rise to this kind of curved production possibilities which is curved away from the origin. Then notice now that of course the specialization to one specific output is not so useful. So suppose that a country would specialize in clothes production instead and not produce any food, just buy food from the international markets. So notice that if all of the labor force is assigned to the clothes production, we would be in this point AA, and then in the terms of the production function, we would really hit this diminishing marginal return. So we would be in this point PP in this figure. And then this kind of extreme specialization of clothing would not necessarily be beneficial because because of the diminishing returns in the clothes production, and therefore it would be like have extremely high prices of clothes compared to the food to justify that kind of specialization. So this is how the specific factors model then can give less benefit from the or at least it doesn't lead to such kind of extreme specialization because we have this kind of production possibility frontier that it's curved away from the origin. Okay, so in the next lesson then we will consider even perhaps more elaborate model called Heckscher-Ullin model of international trade. See you then.